A News 2 special presentation. Hurricane Hugo, 30 years. Sponsored by ServPro and Berkeley Electric Cooperative.
It seems so long ago, but the memories are so vivid it also seems like just yesterday.
It was terrifying. It was, it's just hard to explain unless you were here.
One of the problems that these people have out here is that they have so much damage from tree limbs, tops of trees, and whole trees falling on everything, they have no power.
But what emerged from the onslaught has been the strength and the spirit of a people who won't be beaten by Hugo or anything else. And people are the real story of the storm. So many suffered and still are. So many risked their lives to save others. A handful sounded the warning and led throughout the siege.
Under a state of emergency.
And so many gave and are continuing to give so that we can rebuild physically and emotionally. That is the story of Hugo.
Terry Casey, my good friend, anchor at News 2 at the time, said that 30 years ago, and it still holds true today. We've recovered, we've rebuilt, but the memories are as strong as they were in 1989. These memories, along with several scars still dotting the low-country landscape, are the story of Hugo today. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ron Fowler. Over the next hour, we will relive those memories. For those that survived Hurricane Hugo, there is one question they all have an answer to. Where were you? We were here before, during, and after the storm. Myself, Terry, Leslie, Dan, and the rest of the News 2 team, the only voice on the television when Hugo arrived September 21st in the dark of night. This is our story. Well, we've been tracking it like we tracked every single system from early September, the first week in September. If you'd have told me on September 9th, when that wave came off the continent of Africa, that 12 days later it would be one of the biggest stories, if not weather story, news story that we've ever seen in our history, I couldn't have imagined that at that time. But I think the time I really realized was once it hit the northeast tip of Puerto Rico. And once it hit Puerto Rico, the winds were 150 miles an hour. We saw the damage there. And from that point on, now our window is really shrunk in terms of expecting a landfall later that week. It got bigger, it got larger, it got stronger. And then obviously I get goosebumps thinking about it, knowing that, you know, it looks like it is not going to deviate off its northwest track and that Charleston, the coast of South Carolina, would be impacted.
That means the hurricane seemingly will be steered into the southeast coast.
Hurricane Hugo. He is on his way. Rob says expected to make landfall around midnight or so.
A little after midnight, midnight and 2 the way. We need to mention that we are obviously going to leave our TV station, the studios in Mount Pleasant. I'll be going to the National Weather Service. You will be going to the emergency preparedness. So we also are evacuating the Mount Pleasant area, but we will continue to broadcast, give you the latest information.
And that we want to reiterate. We will stay on the air or make every attempt to bring you the information you need to have. Now, for all of us here at TV2 Action News, I'm Terry Casey. Good night. We will see you throughout the night. I went to emergency preparedness headquarters with Leslie.
We had absolutely no idea what we were in for at the EOC, and already the roof was coming. So in the eye of the storm, we evacuated. All we had to do was move from one part of a parking lot to the other, but it was already so confusing, and there was so much debris everywhere. We couldn't find the building. And I remember briefly thinking, how much longer? How much longer? Because we knew the backside of the hurricane was coming.
Terry, Leslie, and I kept Dan Ashley updated by phone. It was nearly midnight as Dan was doing an update from the transmitter. It wasn't very pretty, but Dan was the only broadcaster left on the air in the Low Country. If nothing else, it was information.
Good evening, everyone. Dan Ashley reporting live from our transmitter facility in Orlando. I spoke with our...
It was a smart place to be in terms of our ability to stay on the air as long as possible, but a frightening place to be. If you can imagine 165-mile-an-hour winds or whatever it was, just raking across that 2,000-foot transmitter tower right above our heads. To be honest, we thought we were going to get killed that night. We didn't think we would survive.
I was young, 24 years old, and that was scary because of the enormity of the situation.
Metal bending is a very eerie feeling.
So it was dangerous, and we knew it was dangerous, but we tried to stay calm and collected as best we could and give people updated information. As it turned out, that facility allowed us to stay on the air longer than anyone else. I was the last broadcaster on the air before power really got knocked out, and the first one on the next day in the entire community because of our decision to be at that transmitter facility.
Day one after Hurricane Hugo, as the cleanup and the restorations of our home begin.
What followed in the days and weeks ahead was heart-wrenching to see the extent and scope of the damage across such a wide area. Through the barrier islands, up through Somerville, down south toward Beaufort, up north, all the way to McClellanville, so badly hit. All of these communities just utterly devastated. And we went to work trying to reach out to those communities and figure out where the damage was and what the relief situation was and who needed what. And it was an intense time.
The enormity of the destruction was just more than you could believe. Steeples, you know, we're the holy city, right? And I remember trying to write to it in a beautiful way, if I could, just to try to add something to how profound this was. And I wrote, "The holy city is scorned." I mean, it really is bringing tears to my eyes, really just thinking about it. At the time, you weren't going to cry, but now thinking about it as a sum total of an event that we covered for a year, and it's all we talked about for 10 years. That's how big a thing it was for all of us, for everyone who went through it. You didn't stop talking about it. Everything was before Hugo, after Hugo. Was it before Hugo? Was it after Hugo? We were part of something, and we got to see absolute, genuine leadership. Perhaps leadership that in our lives we may never see leadership like that again.
These folks now have about a half dozen or better new residents in their backyard, all fishing boats.
Just something that seemed at the time, seemed as though this will be insurmountable. But it wasn't, obviously, in the end. It came back better than we could ever imagine. But at the time, it was like nothing we had ever seen before. We couldn't have dreamed it up.
But in the years since, Charleston and the entire Low Country has bounced back so brilliantly and powerfully. And I always love going back for a visit, and I'll see you soon.
God, I miss you so much.
In the aftermath of the storm, people found creative ways to help however they could. In Georgetown County, a florist used her flower shop's van to deliver supplies. News 2's Taylor Murray has that story.
That's what this shop is all about, is helping people.
A little flower shop in the heart of historic Georgetown. The owner says the shop delivers more than just flowers, it delivers hope.
I think florist shops are ministries in themselves.
It's a hope delivery business that was birthed during the most devastating storm many in her community had ever witnessed, Hurricane Hugo.
This is the main street of Georgetown. It has been cordoned off. The only people there are people like this, people who come back to their stores to try to replace things.
It's so vivid and so strong in your mind about the devastation and the strength of that storm till it was like yesterday.
30 years ago, when Hugo rushed ashore, the Georgetown County area was devastated. Miraculously, Jeanette's home and flower shop made it through the storm, but so many weren't so lucky.
It hit during the night, so a lot of them had no clothes to put on the next morning. You know, they were in their pajamas or whatever they had on that night before, or whatever they could find to put on. So they were in immediate need of everything.
So Jeanette went to work. She loaded up her flower shop's delivery van with supplies and drove from Georgetown to McClellanville to Sandpit, dispersing whatever she could to help those devastated from the storm.
We were out and about, and so many of those people were in such a state of shock that they didn't care what was delivering supplies to them, because, you know, that was a desperate situation.
She even loaded a helium tank from her flower shop into her van so that she could give balloons to children.
When they get up in the morning and their house is gone, their toys are gone, everything that's normal in their life is gone, it's amazing the smile that a balloon will bring.
Jeanette says that she's still using her van to help those in need after disaster strikes, because it's during the tough times, like in the aftermath of Hurricane Hugo, that little flower shop vans become hope delivery vehicles. In studio, Taylor Murray, Count on 2.
Life continued during Hurricane Hugo, even the burst of new life. Olivia Parsons has the story of the nurses who stayed to deliver them during the worst of the storm.
Ginger Ballantyne and Amy Guest watched Hugo unfold behind the doors of the Old St. Francis Hospital in downtown Charleston.
It was rough.
Ballantyne was a labor and delivery nurse at the time. Guest was and still is an ER nurse. both told to pack a bag and expect to stay at the hospital for at least 3 days.
We did not have any idea what was going to happen to us.
But that didn't stop them from doing their job.
All we worried about was taking care of our community at that time.
Valentine says while one woman was giving birth, all she could remember were the ceiling tiles rippling above.
And then all night long, the doors rattled. The water was coming down the elevator shaft.
Guests and the ER staff relocated to the second floor. She says while Hugo was brewing, people were banging on the doors of the hospital, begging to be let in because they had nowhere to go.
A lot of people came in the building that night. I mean, we took nursing homes, psych patients. They were all up on second floor with us.
She says she remembers the windows popping out and how she could feel the building sway. And when she looked out the window, the entire street was nothing but water.
This is a stressful thing that I'll probably never get over because the cars were floating, boats, houses were torn up.
She says once Hugo passed, the hospital went into autopilot, working around the clock to help those in need, not even knowing if they themselves had a home to return to. Valentine says without water at times or electricity, the people working at the hospital were still prepared to help in any way possible.
We fed so many people other than just hospital employees and patients. It was super amazing.
They say it built a different kind of bond between the staff, changing their lives forever.
St. Francis has always been my family. But in times like that, you really see how much that means. And that's why I've been here 40 years.
And though the two never want to experience a storm like Hugo again, they're empowered knowing they can handle whatever Mother Nature throws their way because, after all, they're survivors of Hugo. In Charleston, Olivia Parsons, Count on 2.
You know, we've been advising these people for a day and a half, almost 2 days now, that this was going to be a dangerous storm, that the potential was there, the biggest threat potential in years. And it's almost ironic that 30 years almost to the day, Gracie came across this area. And I'm sure there were some people that did not heed the warnings that were given then, and there will be some now that did not heed the warnings. So basically try to fend for yourself. If you haven't moved yet and you're not planning to move, I hope the Lord has mercy on your soul and it helps you survive.
The brunt of Hugo's impact was felt farther north towards McClellanville, the site of a terrifying night spent sheltered in a local high school as the waters rose.
On the night of September 21st, 1989, hundreds of families took refuge here at Lincoln High School, one of many shelters here in Charleston County. It was a horrifying night, a frightening ordeal as floodwaters filled this safe haven.
I reached down on the floor. And when I reached down on the floor, it was water. Then I alerted everybody in the room to get up. We have water in here. And so when we got up, the water kept coming in. And on the glass door, we could see when it got as high as the door, we could see the little crabs and the little fish. That's when I realized that we were trapped. We were inside. We couldn't get out at all because the water was so high, you couldn't even open the door. People start panicking then. So the water came above the door.
Mrs. Young says a minister lifted her grandchildren to safety.
He took my 2 grandsons and put them on top of the refrigerator because the water was just that high.
She says many thought they would drown.
We thought we were going to die. We thought this was it because Miss Purdy was in there and she said to me, she said, Miss Young said, look, we came over here to die, you know, because there was so much water. Around 6 o'clock that morning, the water had gone down, had receded enough for us to come out. When we came out that morning, well, my car was, there were two cars, well, I have some pictures, there were 2 cars on top of my car. My car was smashed to the ground. And all on the baseball field, a football field in the back, cars were this all on top of each other. It was, you know, it was a blessing. No one drowned. The mistake was we were just so close to the Atlantic Ocean. We were right there. That should not have been our shelter. I still say we are still blessed And of course, the next time, if another storm is coming this way, hurricane anyway, is coming this way, we will be more serious about getting ready, because we had never experienced anything like that before.
The sounds of Hugo are still seared into our minds today. Ariel Hooley sat down with a local musician who composed a song the night of Hurricane Hugo that became a rebuilding anthem to drone out the constant sounds of chainsaws.
The winds were beginning to pick up around 6, 7 o'clock, and I was sitting in my house with a guitar, and I started thinking about The Wizard of Oz. And so I started playing it, and this is the riff. It went. So I was sitting there playing it, and I kept playing it over and over, and my wife yelled at me and said, "Hey, Michael, come to the window." She said, "Can you believe it? It's raining sideways." And so that phrase just caught me right then and there.
It was raining sideways.
Within 10 minutes, Michael Davis wrote a song that would become a rebuilding anthem for the Low Country. Raining Sideways went on to sell 30,000 copies. Davis rode out Hurricane Hugo with his wife in their Hanahan home.
It was unbelievably loud. And as a guitar player in a rock band, I'm used to loud, but it was amazingly loud. And I can still remember the sound of the bricks being peeled off the corners of the house.
Music has always been a part of Michael Davis's life. That year, he finally took the steps to open up his own music store. You can visit him at Old Ye Music Shop in Hanahan. While you're there, you can ask him to play a little of Raining Sideways. While Davis wrote the song during Hurricane Hugo, he says it has one simple message everyone can take away.
My message is always a message of faith. You know, part of the song, "Good Lord's watching from up above." You know, as long as you have faith, you're going to be okay.
When the lights went out.
Everyone who lived through Hurricane Hugo has a story. We'd like to thank you for sharing them with us on Facebook. We read through all of them and relived the event with you. Recently, we sat down with a local Mount Pleasant resident for his memories of the storm.
30 years later, it's a memory. I still tear up. Myself and my wife and friends didn't take it as seriously as we should have. And we were very carefree and thinking, you know, this is going to be, a couple days and then we're going to be back to our routine. That evening when the storm approached, we could hear the wind howling in the background. We could hear the foundation shake. And during the storm, we heard a tree go up through the air and go through our second story. We had a kiddie pool at the time, and we funneled the water from the ceiling, which was water was pouring into the shower. If we had not done that, we probably would have lost our house. The next morning when we walked outside and saw the devastation, I can't tell you how amazed we were. Our jaws just dropped. One of the houses across the street from us had been split in half. Nobody knew what to do in the beginning. The community really pulled together. People shared food. We had to get used to the idea we weren't going to have electricity. It was brutally hot. One of the first things that happened after the shock was people were putting tarps on their houses because most people had roof damage. And then came the chainsaws after putting tarps on, because people had to get the trees out of their houses, off of their houses, and just cut up. I must have gone through every pair of sneakers I had multiple times, and you couldn't dry them except in the sun because our dryers didn't work. And so I volunteered at the Red Cross with Bob, one of my coworkers. I think for the people who were there at the Red Cross, it was incredibly important just to be able to talk, just to be able to cry. People had never found themselves in situations like that. It is a time to pull together. And people do. There are good people out there. And I think milestones like that show people's character, whether they're going to help, whether they're going to do the right thing. In the case of Hugo, this city really pulled together.
The voice of action hours before landfall, Linda Lombard, takes a look back at that night as Hurricane Hugo crept closer.
That's Hugo knocking on the door. Get ready.
As chairman of Charleston County Council and chairman of Emergency Council during Hurricane Hugo, Linda Lombard answered your calls and your questions.
I just explained to everyone on television what was going on, that he was coming. And my last words, get out of town as soon as you can.
Hold secure. She offered words of encouragement as she faced the effects of the storm herself.
There was no electricity, no nothing, and it was September, so it was hot as Hades.
After the hurricane, Lombard recalls riding down King Street and seeing roofs ripped off homes.
And then I came to my house to see how the neighborhood was doing, and I had to walk the last 3 blocks because the trees were down.
She says the Holy City eventually got back on its feet, thanks to the community coming together.
And I'm so proud of this community. I'm so happy to be a part of it.
In Charleston, Olivia Parsons, Count on 2.
Don't go away as we'll sit down with former Mayor Joseph P. Riley Jr., my good friend and fellow News 2 anchor Leslie Lyles. That's coming up after the break. All right, Mr. Mayor, so let's go back 30 years. Well, we are certainly looking at this anniversary. Hard to believe 30 years ago, Hurricane Hugo was ravaging our coast, for lack of a better term. And I'm joined by 2 people very special to me, very special to this community. Leslie Lyles, who was our main female anchor at WCBD at that time during Hugo. And of course, the man, the myth, the legend, Mayor Joe Riley, who led us through that disaster. And Mayor, thank you for joining us, but let's kind of catch up first and we'll go back. What are you doing right now? And you look great, by the way.
Well, thank you, Al. Both of you look great, and it's great to be back, and thank you for your service. I'm retired as mayor, have been mainly working hard to raise the money and get under construction the International African American Museum, so I have not retired yet.
And Leslie has recently joined us again in Charleston. You're back home,
right.
Leslie.
After
We're so happy.
A few years away. You're happy. I'm so happy. I'm desperate to get home for so long, but yeah,
Well,
so happy
welcome
to be
home.
back. Yeah, thank you.
All right, Mr. Mayor, so let's go back 30 years. Let's take you back to that Thursday evening, the night that Hurricane Hugo made landfall. It was about 5 o'clock or so, and you had to step up to the podium. Everybody was listening. Everybody was hanging on your every word.
There will be more flooding as a result of this storm than any Charlestonian has ever experienced. It will boggle the mind, and it is going to be extraordinary. So if you live in low-lying areas, take this remaining window of opportunity to evacuate.
Mr. Mayor, listening to that, I think I get goosebumps because I remember that there wasn't much more time to react, that we had to react at that time. But being a meteorologist, we knew that the forecast was still a little bit iffy, and you had to make that statement and really take a stand out front. What was going through your mind before you got up to the podium, while you're giving that speech, if you will, and then after the fact?
Well, I knew I was doing my duty to save lives, and I had to thread the needle between fear and panic and convince the citizens that they needed to get out. People are not going to leave because you say, now, I'm Mayor Riley and it's important to evacuate. You know, you've got to thread the needle between fear and panic, and you've got to get them out, because if you don't get them out, they're going to die and it is your fault. So I knew that my job was to save lives and to get people motivated and afraid of hanging around. And we not only did that, we went door to door in low-lying areas and got people out because we know they would have been killed. You had to be prepared for the criticism, but you knew it was your responsibility to keep people from dying. That's what was at stake. Worst hurricane in the city's history. One person in the city of Charleston died.
It's
And
a
that
miracle.
that was a house collapsing. It had nothing to do with rising water.
And
Leslie, I know
they
you have a
did.
question.
I was just going to say, you did keep people from dying, and also Mayor Bunch too. If you imagine what would have
Absolutely.
happened if people
Yes.
had not
That's right.
gotten out. But if you look back at it now, would you have done anything differently, or steadfast into you did everything just right?
You know, Leslie, I'm so happy to be able to say I wouldn't have done one thing differently.
And when it was over, before the sun came up, my job was to drive from the EOC, which was a difficult task because there were no street signs anywhere
It was
and
so
debris
pitch black.
everywhere. Darkness of night takes
That's
on a
right.
new
That's
meaning then. And it took us quite a long time to get to you. And when we did, the sun was just coming up.
Yeah.
And I saw you at City Hall, and except for the birth of my own children, I don't know when I've been happier to see anyone else. And at that time, we checked in on each other. How are you doing? How's your family? But then when those cameras came on, you had one thing on your mind, and that was rebuilding.
That's right.
Immediately.
Well, I told my staff when I told them we were going to do the best job any city did preparing. Now, I came over at midnight, as you recall.
Yeah.
So we were in City Hall and radioed with the other people in different places, 5 stations. I said, okay, y'all did the best job any city ever did of preparing. Now, we're going to do the best job any city ever did in recovering. Every tree out of the way, every house that had mail delivery again, every power line that could get back on, everything where people say, well, I can see I'm going to make it.
I think a lot of people were surprised when right after the storm, shortly after the storm, you were encouraging tourism.
We made a special effort to be able to say that the tourists could come back, and the horses and buggies are now on the streets and the bus tours, and people are walking, the chimes are ringing, and people are back.
Why tourism so fast?
Well, we needed to get people back to work. You know, if you lose your power, that's a bummer. You lose your car, that's bad. You lose your job, you're not going to get a check. So there was a great pressure felt to every business we could get open, and in our tourism economy that touches every sector of our region, we had to get the word. We had 2 messages that were conflicting. We had one message, we needed to tell the country we needed money, you know, and had to get money in. And we also had to tell the message that we weren't devastated, and we're going to be back.
I think, Mr. Mayor, for me personally, one of the memories I'll never forget was Waterfront Park. You really pushed through a project that we had been devastated, and you said, we have to have this. People need something positive.
Yeah.
And today, this is one of the gems of the Lowcountry, no doubt about it. But you felt it was very important to make sure that park got open on time.
We couldn't miss a deadline. I wouldn't let us miss any deadline. Whatever the deadline was, if it was going to be done on a certain date, we had that, it was done. Because if you didn't do it, then the community, it was a failure. You couldn't let the citizens feel like there was a failure going on. You know, they were succeeding. Whatever it was, kept the pressure on. We said, we're going to do it then, we're going to do it now.
Well, we can't thank you enough for being here with us to reminisce about Hurricane Hugo. But before we leave, I want to play one clip for you.
The leadership of Charleston during that period of time was absolutely incredible. Joe Riley was amazing.
Is there anything in particular you want to say to them?
Thanks. Just that they did an incredible job in so many different ways. They kept the community together.
Mr. Mayor, I think all of us say thanks, but this is 30 years later. The emotion is still there from Hurricane Hugo.
Well, thank you, and Leslie, it's wonderful having you back. But seeing all of that, I look very different. You're just as beautiful as you were 30 years ago.
See, this is why he's the most popular mayor in America. But you know what? What a time to have shared with both of you.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it did change our lives, I think.
It
I think
did.
we take things seriously, but we know that we're resilient. And we can survive anything if we do it together.
That's exactly right, always. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Godspeed to you and your family. And let's hope we don't have another Hugo or a like storm for another 30 years.
Let's hope and pray. Thank you.
We thought we'd be safe going 20 miles away from the water, and we were.
For the most part, but the trees and the power lines down and everything, it kept us there for 3 days after the storm. We had to cut ourselves out.
Chop our way out of the neighborhood because all the pine trees had fallen, and then luckily none of them hit the house we were in. But it was pretty terrifying. It was probably one of the worst nights of my life. How about you?
I don't want to relive it again.
No.
Millions of dollars worth of boats right in here, just useless now. Edge of the bay.
Hugo left its mark on the Lowcountry. Some of the scars still visible today, as you saw at Lincoln High School. Temple Ricky traveled to another marker that told of the water's rise in downtown Charleston.
Douglas Rogers tends the bar at Tommy Condon's, but 30 years ago, he was a student at the College of Charleston asking his loved one for advice.
When I was worried about the hurricane, I talked to my grandmother and she said, "We don't leave for hurricanes, it'll be fine." After that, she left for every hurricane.
Rogers says no one expected the damages that came with Hugo. He shows us around the restaurant to a spot that marks where the floodwaters peaked.
They didn't last that long, this high obviously, but as the tide went out, they slowly went down.
Rogers explains the floodwaters came in at high tide through the doors and drains, leaving a lasting impact.
I'm about 6'2", so it was a good 5.5, almost, probably about 5.5 feet.
6 years after Tommy's opened its doors, Hurricane Hugo closed them for 9 months of repair.
The boards of the floor had bundled up, and there was pluff mud everywhere, and crab, a couple of dead fish, a little bit of wildlife to let us know that they were still here.
And as a way to look on the bright side, Rogers says the situation ended up helping Charleston's tourism business.
It put us on the map because we were hit so hard by it, and it brought more people down. It had its good and bad implications, I guess.
I was a young patrolman at Charleston City Police Department, working. We were running around trying to prepare as we knew at the time how to prepare. We were so naive at the time. It was something that we had never experienced, at least in my lifetime. My home that I lived in at the time was totally destroyed. I didn't have a home for months.
Areas inland weren't safe from Hugo's wrath either. Rural areas like Alvin and Berkeley County were hit hard. Raymond Owens has the memories of those who took the calls for help.
At the time, I was a corporal with the sheriff department. Late that night when Hugo started hitting, sounded like a locomotive train was coming, the tree was falling. Phone started ringing, people calling the office, asking to send the National Guard for them.
It was too late.
And the one lady that I spoke with had a little girl, and when it hit, she says, "The tree just fell across my trailer, and I can't do anything." I said, "Did you get hurt?" He said, "No." I said, "You and your little girl go underneath the tree." The next morning when she called me back, she said that's what saved her life. The tree held her trailer down even though they were wet. The tree held the trailer down.
Call after call.
Up in the 41 area, the lady called me when the storm was happening and said her house was rocking side to side. And I said, I was in the office in Mount Corner. I said, "How many children in the house?" She said, 3. I said, "Take your 3 children and go in the bathroom and close the door." She told me that next day, she said the whole house just about vanished, but they were saved in the bathroom because the door was closed and her 3 children was in the room.
Captain Henry Green was a volunteer at the fire department.
We went over to my parents' house and water was coming through the brick wall. And I thought that'd been the longest night. I thought daylight wasn't never coming.
After it was over,
we had to get out and help also with the trucks and chainsaw to at least open up one lane on the road in case emergency needed.
Reverend Earl Buford is a retired pastor and sheriff's deputy. During Hugo, he was the county director of disaster.
After Hugo, everything just going to the bus.
The Alvin Community Center became sort of a central location to distribute supplies to people in northern Berkeley County. Even today, in his 80s, he has nightmares.
I think I almost lose some of my mind because, you know, when I go sleep in the night, it seems like I'm just still answering call.
But they're all glad they could help.
Oh, I feel good. I think that's something that the Lord, sometimes, you know, the word was coming to me because people were calling so fast. I was opening my mouth, but I think the Lord sent an angel to speak, to tell me the word to tell the people. And it worked out pretty good.
All three of these men continue to serve their community here in Alvin, either at the sheriff's substation or the fire department. In Alvin, I'm Raymond Owens. Count on 2.
We'll be right back with more memories of those who survived Hurricane Hugo after this short break. The damage in Dorchester County was quite severe, prompting President Bush to visit the area in the aftermath of the storm. We explore what has been done over the last 30 years to make sure Dorchester County fares better in the next storm.
Dorchester County was not prepared. None of us were. We were a fairly small government. Population was, like half of what it is now.
Former Dorchester County Emergency Management Director Ken Harrell was only working for 3 months before Hurricane Hugo made landfall in the Lowcountry. He had no emergency management training. The department was only made up of him and one other staff member, and they weren't expecting the storm to impact the county as much as it did.
Hurricane Hugo was the one storm and the first storm to demonstrate that hurricanes can have disastrous effects, much further inland than the coast.
The weak side of the eye skirted the Somerville area, but it still brought winds with gusts over 110 miles per hour. That led to tree damage, and lots of it.
And just about every major road blocked.
By trees?
Blocked. Many trees.
Yeah.
And down power poles, utility poles.
5 people were killed in the county, about 100 homes were destroyed, and 5,000 structures were damaged. President George H.W. Bush came with Mayor Berlin G. Myers, Governor Campbell, and other leaders to see the devastation firsthand.
The president came in, within a few days. I don't remember exactly how long, and that helped bring some attention to the area.
Another prominent official in the county, Sheriff L.C. Knight, lived there during Hugo, but during the storm was stationed in Charleston when he was working for the state law enforcement division. He said it was very difficult to get around because of the number of trees that were down.
I was in Charleston. I was in touch with the people there in Dorchester County and tried to help them all we could because we would have truckloads of supplies coming in. Next morning, time as the storm cleared, we were ready to hit the road, but you just couldn't. Several of our cars, and I think a bunch of the highway patrol cars, were damaged from flying debris.
But today, current Emergency Management Director Mario Formisano says things have changed a lot since Hugo, and he thinks they're much better prepared for the next storm.
There's been a significant evolution since 1989 and a maturity within the emergency management community. The way we prepare the public is much different now with the evolution of social media.
And the county encourages residents to get ready for whenever another storm like Hugo moves through. You can learn a lot more about how to get prepared by visiting the Dorchester County website. In Somerville, Stetson Miller, Count on 2.
I flew across that area yesterday. We did a whole survey across there yesterday morning, and from the air it didn't look as bad as it does from the ground. I think the one thing we have found here, and we knew that at the time, was we're lucky. If we really look at this hurricane and see what it could have done had it been 20 miles farther south, and then Charleston would have been in the core of the problem. So shift it 20 miles and you got a big problem right here.
Now that Hugo is come and gone, we look forward to a future of rebuilding. A future hopefully filled with more advancements in weather technology so we can continue to give you the advance warning needed to stay out of harm's way.
I said that with hope 30 years ago. Since then, there have been many jumps in hurricane forecasting. New and improved global weather models can now more accurately predict where a storm will go. The average 3-day forecast error for hurricanes in 1989 was nearly 300 miles. Today, that number is down to 75. Targeted evacuations can now be nailed down earlier, allowing for more time for you to leave. And if you are told to leave, you should. I'll let those who survived Hugo tell you that.
David Hendricks said they were apprehensive about evacuating, but today they surveyed the damage and thank God that they did.
And I thought maybe the trailer would be tipped over, or maybe sideways or bent up, but I never imagined that it would just be gone.
Everything gone.
It's not a matter of if another Hugo will happen, it is when. We don't know when another hurricane will devastate the Lowcountry, but we can be better prepared, following trusted forecasts and having a hurricane plan in place. You trusted WCBD 30 years ago with Hugo. Trust us now and in the future as we continue to give you accurate forecasts, track storms, and tell your stories.
Nothing left except the pilings of the pier, and that is the power of Hugo. It's something that you would just think would be a nightmare, and you'd wake up and it was a dream.
I really didn't know what to expect, and so it was really kind of mind-blowing to see the devastation and walk down, and there'd be lots where there used to be a house and there was nothing, or look across the creek and there'd be a house sitting in the middle of the creek, or on the other side of the creek.
And I'm standing here today in the midst of the brave souls that battled Hurricane Hugo, and they survived it. Yes!
Today, those memories are the story of Hurricane Hugo. I'd like to thank you all for sharing them with us and for tuning in. I'm Storm Team 2 Chief Meteorologist Rob Fowler.